Hello, I'm the Rubber Von Ducker, and today, West Ham fans, I'm speaking directly to you because many of you seem genuinely confused about the situation with your club, so I'm going to quickly explain it here. Something all the podcasts I've seen have in common, you've all seemed to have hit the nail on the head by comparing yourself with Newcastle. I'm guessing that's because you both have a similar sized stadium, but it is a good analogy because you are polar opposites of each other at the moment, and let me explain why, and this will explain to a large extent why you're not buying players. Let's look first of all at West Ham. What I'm going to do, I'm going to look at the financial figures for the 2019 financial year. The reason for that is that's the last year any of the football clubs have actually reported, so the only figures we have. With West Ham, your total revenue was 191 million. That was made up of matchday revenue 27 million, broadcasting 127 million, and commercial 36 million. You got net debt of 65 million, and most importantly, your wages 136 million. Now, due to COVID, you've lost all your matchday income from the point where COVID kicked off up until we get back in the stadiums. You lost 27 million. As well as that, there'll be a massive hit to the commercial revenue. There's a lot of sponsors and advertisers who A, aren't going to be still doing business, B, don't have the finances for advertising, C, may go bankrupt completely or just need to save money. I think a lot of clubs, if not all clubs, will be looking at the broadcasting revenue as how they're going to finance the club going forward. With lockdown suggested to go into January, it seems unlikely we're going to see any match day before the end of the year, and commercial revenue, it's an unknown. You don't know who's going to survive, you don't know how much they're going to pay, you don't know how long they're going to pay for, so you can't really take that as a steady source of income. So all the Premiership clubs effectively should be running off what they got from broadcasting, and you can immediately see that if your wage is 136 million and your broadcasting is 127 million, you're in deficit roughly by about 9 million. However, this is a 2019 situation and you finished 10th in the league, which means you got extra money in your broadcasting. So realistically, you're probably looking at 100 to 110 million for broadcasting, and that's not taking into account the possibility that the broadcasters need to be refunded for problems with COVID, which may bring it down to 90 million. So we've got a ballpark figure of somewhere between 90 million and 110 million for the majority of football clubs that finish probably 15 and below. Now, that is where your problem is. You've got, let's say, 100 million. Let's be generous. Let's say it's 110. You've got 110 million, but your wages are 136. So you've got a 26 million deficit. You do have debt, well, net debt of about 65 million with debts of 78 and cash. Now, this is in 2019, so that's going to have changed. You've bought more players in, you've let players go out. You've got to lose, realistically, to try and break even, you've got to lose about 20 million. Now, let's look at Newcastle, because surely Newcastle's in the same situation as yourselves. They do have revenue of 176 million, and that's obviously about 14-15 million less than yourselves. That's made up from matchday revenue of 25 million, broadcasting rights of 124 million, and a commercial of 26 million with 1.5 million other, which isn't specified. So again, ignore the other because that's a one-off. As we've said, matchday income of 25 million's gone. Commercial revenue 26 million, you can't really count it, it's going to be massively reduced, you'll get something but you just don't know what. And so we're left with broadcasting of 124 million. Their wages were 97 million. They are in surplus by 27 million. So as much as you are over your budget, they are under, and you really are the polar opposites, because in so many things your matchday revenue very similar, your commercial revenue is very similar, your size of your stadium is very similar. The debt for them is slightly higher. It's 112 million with 14 million in cash, which is net debt of 96 million. Obviously, again, they've spent further on that. I think they had some sales as well. But effectively, Mike Ashley keeps a tight grip on the purse strings, which is a complaint of all Newcastle fans for the last few years. This is the one time it seems to have worked in their favour. So that, in a nutshell, is your situation. There is another aspect to it. The fact that you rent your stadium means you're incurring 2.5 million extra cost that other clubs aren't. If you own a stadium, you don't have to pay yourself a rent. Some may do, but even if you do, you're paying it to yourself, so it's not the end of the world. You're paying it to a outside organisation, so that payment has to be made. And that's 2.5 million regardless of how many people are in the stadium. That's an extra cost that you have that other clubs don't. However, It also includes the stewards, which obviously at other clubs are probably furloughed. You don't have to mess around with that, but you don't get any benefit from that either. Now, you're not heavily in debt, or at least not in as much debt as Newcastle, so theoretically you should be able to borrow money to cover the costs. However, banks in this time are probably not lending rapidly for such things, so I think that's an unlikely area where you can go. So that's kind of left you stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to purchases. And if you look again at Newcastle, they're not spending big. 2 of the players they bought were on free transfers, and the other 2 have cost under 30 million for both of them, or just over. I think it's 32 million for both of them. So for 4 players they've spent 32 million for a fee. But as we've seen, the fact that they're going to all have wages is going to put the wage bill up, but there's room for that to happen in Newcastle. Unfortunately, that's not the case at West Ham. You're not alone in this situation, though. If you look at the figures for Man United in 2019, they actually had a total revenue of 627 million. Matchday alone was 111. I believe the TV revenue was about 250 million and commercial revenue of 275. They had 627 million coming in. You take COVID into account, it goes down to 250 million, which isn't going to be enough to pay their wages of 332 million, at least by their 2019 accounts. They've probably been the most affected club in the UK by financial terms. I dare say Barcelona and Real Madrid are in a similar situation. It is not an accident that Gareth Bale's come to Tottenham on a £15 million loan. They needed to get him off for books. Same with Rodriguez for Everton. They needed him off for books. I don't think Barcelona's quite caught on yet that no one's going to be paying strange money for Messi or any of their players. And even looking at all the other clubs that have done business's transfer window, a lot of them are free transfers. A lot of Premiership clubs have been releasing players. I think everyone's in a situation where they're having to let players go. It's just whether you can get any money for them. And if you are getting money for them, you're not getting a lot. There's also the financial fair play rules. Now, the financial fair play rules are spread out over a 3-year period, so you've got to balance the books over a 3-year period. Now, we've struggled with that. That's very much one of the key reasons that almost puts us into administration in our final year in the Championship. You're in a similar kind of situation in a way. Basically, I've got 2 years of financial results, which are the most recent ones released. And for 2017-2018, you made just over 18.2 million profit. Then in 2018-2019 season, you made a 27 million loss, which wouldn't be a major issue. You would need to be looking at making a profit in the next season, which was the 2019-2020 season. However, as we know, that's when COVID kicked in, and that's when you're going to have lost all the gate receipts and already be losing some of the commercial. And so it's unlikely you made a profit for that year. We find out, I think it's May 21, when the next report's released, but I think it's unlikely you made a profit, or at least a significant profit to balance the books. So now there's further pressure on you to make a profit this year to balance the books, because you've got 27 million loss, whatever 2019-2020 was, and this year. And if 2020 wasn't a win, then you're going to be looking at a 30 million profit to break even under financial fair play. Not only have you got the struggle of getting your wage bill down, you've got the struggle of complying with fair play, which everyone has. But again, teams like Leeds, teams like Fulham, West Brom, Villa, Sheffield United, we've not got to a point where our wages eats up all of the revenue coming in from the broadcasting. And so we're freer to spend. Others like Crystal Palace are trying to get people off their books as well. They bring a couple in and they're trying to get as many off the books as possible. If you go through the list of all the transfers, there's a lot of people being released or put on freeze or sent on loans. To think that people are just magicking money out the air to use it, unless you're Chelsea, which Chelsea just quite clearly do, and you can kind of say that about Man City. The rest of the league is selling to buy. If you're not recently promoted, if you weren't promoted this season or last season, then you're struggling to buy players. You really are. You've got the added extra of having to struggle with financial fair play at the same time. So whilst fact checking what I was going to say next, and yeah, I do occasionally fact check. It's rare, but it happens. I found this little section on Wikipedia, and now I don't know if I read this before I did my original stadium video, but I wish I had, because I should have included it. So here we go. This is on the Wikipedia website for the London Stadium.
and it says here, in September 2018, Lynn Garner, Chief Executive of the London Legacy Development Corporation, revealed that the £2.5 million paid per year by West Ham did not cover the cost of staging matches, leading to increased debts in running the stadium for the 79-year remainder of the tenancy agreement. That's something I suggested in the video but didn't outright say. Well, here we've got the Chief Executive of the London Legacy Development Corporation confirming that, so yep, doesn't cover the costs of stewarding. The LLDC had established the commercial subsidiary E20 as landlords for the stadium, and E20, through their appointment of a stadium operator, provide for all the matchday stewarding, catering, cleaning, fabric and maintenance services, albeit that they profited through the bulk of franchise fees from catering concessions. So what that says to me, and this is a bit I was checking, is if you buy one of those £10 hot dogs that I've heard about from the catering, that money is not going to West Ham. That money goes to the franchisee owner, and then some of it through the franchisee licence or fees goes back to E20. Nothing goes to West Ham at all from the franchising or the bars. If you're wanting to help the club, there's no point buying an extra burger or an extra beer. If you're trying to get the Sullivan and Gould board out, there's no point not eating a hot dog because they're not going to get anything from it. The reason why I bring that up was, if you're a fan and you want to help the club, how can you do it? Well, it looks to me like the only way you can realistically do anything financially would be to buy more merchandise, like a new kit or a football or a video of your greatest achievements or whatever it is they sell. And equally, if you don't want to support the Goulds, well, you're already not, so you're doing the job. I don't know if you should be supporting them or not. I think maybe at this moment, with the situation being as significant as it is, maybe isn't the best time for protests if you want to ensure the long-term future of the club. But let's go on with this section. E20 and West Ham became embroiled in a protracted legal dispute in the High Court. So I said this would come to a head, but it had already come to a head before I'd written the video, apparently, as to which elements of service were included in the annual payments under the 99-year lease. So they're arguing about what covers what, and which elements might be expected to involve an additional regular facility fee. So again, they're already talking about saying, well, we're going to have to charge you more to make this work, with particular reference to West Ham wishing to replace the covering to the athletics track with one in club colours, something most clubs would readily pay for themselves. And E20 refused to open discussions on allowing the usable capacity of a stadium to increase to its full potential of seats unless the disputes were resolved to their satisfaction. However, in November 2018, both parties agreed an out-of-court settlement under which the annual lease payment would be uplifted as the usable capacity increased towards 66,000. So they've done an out-of-court deal now. This may be one of the reasons why you don't want to get rid of your board, because all their criticisms, all their problems, they do know some things. They know how to use a contract. They know how to use British accounting laws. They know how to use the British political system to some degree, which, if you get a new Chinese or American owner, probably won't know the nuances. They'll rely on very expensive accountants and lawyers who may not even come from the UK and so don't necessarily know this little bit of information from 1850. Given your current financial situation and the current COVID crisis, I think the board you've got is probably the best board you could currently ask for. Obviously, they haven't created the situation. COVID's created the situation, but they've slightly overextended themselves in an attempt to push the club forward, which is noble enough, but they've been kind of punished for it. And the question then comes down to, how are debt structured, how are transfer payments structured? Because I dare say a lot of the transfers are probably structured over, we'll pay you this much this year and this much next year, so you're probably talking 3 or 4 years spreading the cost of a transfer. And now that's kind of coming a bit home to roost, because those bills are coming up for payment at a time where you've lost a lot of income. And again, you won't be alone in this. Manchester United have probably done the same thing, as have many other clubs. I also noticed another little snippet. Before they signed off on the lease, there was a certain promise made by West Ham. They additionally promised to pay back any extra cost for the roof and seats within 10 years. Gold stated at the beginning of March that the deal could be complete by the middle of the month. Here they're saying that whatever the additional cost, they would actually pay that amount back. Presumably that's 10 years from when the lease started in 2015, so they've got till 2025 to pay that figure back. Now, I don't know if they're paying back in one go or whether they're going to pay it back in parts on a yearly basis. But that's another factor that's going to come into play with accounts. So, in some respects, you could say, yes, Gould and Sullivan have created a financial mess in some respect. That there's a lot of ins and outs. But that's kind of what they had to do to get the stadium. And the stadium is long term, even if you're leasing it, although I think the rent's going to have to go up. But if you're leasing it and you've got 66,000 capacity and you're filling that, and you can fill it, then you're going to have a lot more revenue, and ultimately it's going to pay off. It's just that all the costs seem to be front loaded. They seem to be at the beginning, which is understandable. Yeah, things are tough, but actually for the time you've got the right people for the job. I do find it strange with West Ham's suggested takeover from American investors, which is meant to have occurred at the end of the season. Why would anyone want to buy a football club right now when you don't know what the income streams are going to be? Why not wait and see, maybe the value of the club goes down? I would also say, do you want owners who are going to do that are going to turn up and just say, we'll fire some money at it and that's going to solve everything? Because I don't think it will in this situation at all. In fact, in some ways, you're better having British owners than American, because if they do sell the stadium to the club, well, they're going to charge Americans more. But if you've got a few friends on the council, if you know a few people, you've done a few deals with people, you've had experience dealing with the London Planning Office, it's going to be easier to negotiate, and you should be able to get a cheaper price. I mean, I suppose it depends on how wealthy the new owners are, but I don't get the idea a consortium's going to be especially wealthy. If it's a sheikh who's got oil fields left, right and centre, then hey, yeah, they can afford to buy the club, pay off the debt, buy the stadium, buy the rest of London. That's the kind of owner you want. But do you really want a 450 million consortium where everyone's putting in 10 million to give you 50 million extra investment, and then halfway through the season they start arguing and one wants his money back and another one wants half his money back? And I guess what I'm saying there is you don't want just any takeover. Trust me, as a Villa fan, you don't want just any takeover. I would say until there's a billionaire wanting to throw money into the club, I would be very dubious of takeovers. I'd be very dubious of people who think it's a wise idea to buy a football club at this time and pay full price for it, because it implies they don't have much business savvy, so they're going to just buy loads of rubbish players for really high prices because that's what the newspapers say you should do. What you want is for someone who's going to move the club forward in some way. Grant you on the pitch it hasn't been the greatest, but there's a lot going off the pitch, and they seem to have done rather well with negotiations there, where they've convinced the London Legacy Development Corporation, convinced them that they can pay for the stewarding. I mean, that's pretty good if you're renting a stadium and it doesn't even cover the costs of the stewards. I mean, effectively, you're getting the ground for free. So yeah, they've definitely done some good deals. Maybe not on the pitch, but off the pitch. Whether that comes back to bite them later, I suspect it will. But you never know. You never know. Finally, a couple of notes on players. One thing I thought, we don't know whether there's been any change to the way bonuses are paid out at the club. So if you're having financial problems, they may have moved a quarterly payment of bonuses for goals and appearances back to the end of the year. And if that was the case, that might upset some players. Obviously, the players are obsessed about the loss of Grady Dean Gardner. Even with that, because I think they did have to still to raise some money to cover some costs and cover some debts. Even with that sale, we don't know the full details. As we've discovered, these owners like to put in strange clauses into contracts. It may well be that there is a Douglas Luiz style clause in his contract that says if we see him doing really well and we want to, we'll give you an extra £5-10 million and we'll buy him back from West Brom. Equally, they may have a first refusal if West Brom are relegated or any other circumstance. Although the player may have gone relatively cheap now, in the preference for cash, I suspect there may be a way to bring him back, a feeling that they may have slipped in a contract. I've got no knowledge of the transfer at all. I have no connection with any football club or even any journalist, but I just have a feeling that maybe they might have slipped in a little rebuy clause. So that's a possibility. We don't know. I think they probably will still try and get one more player, and I think if they do, they'll probably get a bargain, because the last 2 weeks some clubs are going to panic that they haven't raised any funds, especially in the Championship. So you may see players come in that would be effectively a bargain for the price you've got, but will probably be standard for the market at the moment. But yeah, there's still opportunities with the last 2 weeks. Plenty more still to go in this transfer window. I can see West Ham buying not much. It'll be a one, maybe two if you're lucky. One's more realistic. January may be a completely different story, especially if the fans are back in the stadium. So we'll have to wait and see. I hope that explains the situation for you. I've been the Rubber Von Ducker. Have a good one.